Perhaps the most important meeting of the century, as Donald J. Trump said. At the airplane ramp in Beijing, 300 Chinese children in blue and white uniforms are waving American flags, and they are chanting in Mandarin, "Welcome, warm greetings." Walking down the red carpet are the President of the United States and the head of the welcoming delegation, Chinese Vice President Han Zheng. He is Xi Jinping's personal envoy, that same Han which is probably pronounced Han. A year ago, he specifically flew to Washington for Trump's inauguration. The signal is clear. No matter what anyone tells you, Beijing treats this visit as an event of historic significance. And they are right. They are right. This is an event of historic significance. Today, we will break down everything that is happening. Why did this happen? What does each side want? What are they willing to sacrifice? What trump cards does each have? And what will come out of all this? Most likely, of course, we're not fortune tellers, but based on the data, we can form some ideas about what might happen. And most interestingly, how this meeting in Beijing could change, say, the war with Iran, the elections in the US, and the situation in Ukraine. And the ending, gentlemen, the ending will surprise you. In addition, we'll talk about the problem of Islam in the US, a problem that China solved very simply. They simply put them in camps. They killed all the Muslims. And no man, no problem. It's all very simple. Let's see which path the US will take. Maybe Xi Jinping will teach Trump. Just to be clear, on May 13, the Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution and Limited Government in the House of Representatives held a hearing titled, "America Without Sharia: Why Are Political Islam and Sharia Law Incompatible with the United States?" I want you to think about that. Did you think about that title? It's a headline that made half of American television just shudder, and the other half, for the first time in 3 years, reach for the remote. A topic that the mainstream considered marginal and dangerous just 5 years ago has now entered the halls of Congress on the official record. This is significant. It should be taken seriously, without hysteria, but also without that polite blindness for which Europe is paying the price today. But let's start with Trump, China, and the bank. The balance on which the world rests today. A year and a half ago, it seemed that the world was heading toward a trade war without rules, as they say. In the spring of 2025, Washington raised tariffs on Chinese goods to 145%. Beijing responded almost in kind, 125% on American imports. Both economies felt the pain. Chinese exports to the U.S. dropped by 20%, but American farms also lost their markets. Their semiconductor manufacturers lost contracts. But then something happened that rarely happens in big geopolitics. Both sides, thank God, blinked at the same time. In October of 2025 in Busan, South Korea, Trump and Xi held their first face-to-face meeting since the second presidency. 100 minutes of nonstop conversation. That's a lot, ladies and gentlemen. Trump came out and said 12 out of 10. That's how he rated this meeting. On paper, it really looked impressive. It's very impressive. China pledged to stop the supply of fentanyl precursors, suspend export restrictions on rare earth metals, open its market to American soybeans, and remove American companies from their restriction lists. In response, the U.S. lowered tariffs and extended trade exemptions. Now, the most important thing, which of these things was actually done? They talked, they reached agreements, they smiled, shook hands, and then went their separate ways. Partially, yes. So it worked. China really did suspend a number of retrospective tariffs and removed several American companies from blacklists. And according to data from the spring of 2026, it seems they are fulfilling their commitments to purchase American soybeans. These are specific but unverifiable actions. But the situation with fentanyl is a bit different. In March 2026, Beijing loudly announced the illness of 7 people and the shutdown of 200 websites connected to fentanyl networks.
Приговоров.
0 convictions. And this isn't the first time. China did the same thing in 2024 under Biden. They announced measures but quietly rolled them back later. Well, this indicates that, as they say, the authorities are directly involved in this, regarding rare earth metals. So a pause has been introduced, but the U.S. and China still disagree on the interpretation of what exactly was promised and to what extent. The Brookings Institution put it quite clearly. The parties did not make a deal, but rather a temporary truce. They're sizing each other up, and each side has its own version of what was actually agreed upon. Now, Trump didn't come alone, so who did he come with and what does it mean? This is where things actually get really interesting. It's worth taking a closer look. Who arrived? There's a general, and General Aketa is there too, but mainly what is Trump promoting? Elon Musk, Tesla, SpaceX, Tim Cook, Apple, David Solomon, Goldman Sachs, Larry Fink, BlackRock, Jane Fraser, that's Citigroup. Black. So the head of Boeing, what's his name? Kelly Ortberg. Ortberg, yes. Representatives from Meta, MasterCard, Visa, Micron, GE Aerospace. And at the last moment, literally during a layover in Alaska, Jensen Huang joined the delegation. He's the CEO of NVIDIA. He wasn't on the list at first. Later, when stories about his absence started coming out, Trump personally called Huang and asked him to join. He immediately flew to Alaska and boarded Air Force One. What does this mean? This is not a trade delegation. This is a message. Trump is telling Beijing, look who I brought. People whose companies manufacture in China, sell in China, make money in China, and at the same time suffer from American export restrictions just as much as their Chinese partners. They want to work, they want peace, and here they are, standing behind me. The presence of Huang, by the way, is especially telling. NVIDIA, under American export restrictions, cannot sell its best chips in China, which are used, you guessed it, for artificial intelligence. NVIDIA's losses are colossal, and Beijing knows it. And the fact that Huang is sitting next to Trump and on Trump's side is both a signal of flexibility and, as they say, a bargaining chip at the same time. We're losing and you're losing, and we don't want to lose and you don't want to lose, so let's make a deal. Now let's pause for a second and talk about something else. Trump, that very Trump who started the trade war, well, it was Trump who started it, right? Who imposed the highest tariffs in the history of our bilateral relations, who for years called China the main threat to the American economy, flew where? To Beijing with a red carpet, 300 children in the Arctic, Kester, and they literally bring along the entire American business community. Guys, now we're ready to talk. Who won the trade war? No one did. Both lost, both sides lost, and both realized it. That's the paradox. The toughest economic standoff in decades ended with both sides sitting down at the table. Because competition has its limits, and it's called interdependence. What does each country actually want? Let's figure it out honestly without diplomatic formulas. Take the US, for example. First specific purchases, Boeing's soybeans beef. And all this before November 2026 because Trump needs a victory before the midterm elections. I also really want there to be a victory, right, for Congress. So the economic indicators need to look good. And China knows that we need this. Second, cooperation on Iran. A war with Iran hit the global energy markets. Iranian oil exports, that's about, 1.5 million barrels a day, right? It was going to China. Beijing is the main buyer of Iranian oil. If China reduces its purchases or at least stops actively helping Tehran bypass sanctions, it will change the calculations. And calculations are the most important thing in wars. Third, the issue of rare earth metals. China controls about 90% of global processing. Even if it's mined elsewhere, it's shipped there and processed there. Rare earth metals. Without them, there are no electric cars, no fifth-generation fighter jets, no smartphones. The U.S. wants guaranteed access, not just to buy, but guaranteed access. What does China want? If one country wants something and the other doesn't, negotiation is very difficult. First, they want something that we won't give them. They want to change the wording on Taiwan. Currently, the U.S. does not officially support the independence of the island. Beijing wants Washington to say, we are against the independence of the island. It's a difference of one word, but a huge difference in policy. We won't agree to that. Second, lifting export restrictions on chips. That means NVIDIA, ASML, the entire semiconductor chain. Without advanced chips, China can't develop artificial intelligence as fast as they'd like to. Third, this is about long-term stability. China needs to make sure that the roller coaster of 2025 don't happen again. That is, Trump is unpredictable. Beijing wants mechanisms like a so-called trade council made up of officials from both countries who will monitor the implementation of agreements. It's also important for us that China fulfills its side of the agreements. Every country has to sacrifice something, right? What do you get? What do you give? The situation from my point of view is roughly as follows. The U.S. will most likely agree to partially soften its rhetoric on Taiwan. Honestly, I don't know how, but they'll figure something out. Still, their official policy won't change. They might allow limited expansion, selling chips through controlled licenses. Regarding Iran, they will demand concrete actions, not just words. If there's a conversation about this, I have all sorts of ideas on the matter. What won't the U.S. give up? Well, real progress on Taiwan, lifting military export restrictions, recognition of China's sphere of influence in the South China Sea. We don't want that. We want to have that ourselves in Latin America. Unlimited influence. And there, in the South China Sea, we don't want to give it to China. After all, we're still a shark with big teeth for now. That's what we think. China will most likely promise major purchases, Boeing, agricultural products, a trade council, and possibly some restrictions on assistance to Iran, but silently, without commitments. I mean, public commitments. Maybe there will be some internal ones, but public ones are unlikely. What won't China give up? A real refusal to support Iran is too costly, cheap oil is too beneficial, and concessions on Taiwan that are unfavorable to themselves. And most importantly, they won't fulfill their obligations to purchase in full, just like they've done 100 times before. They never fully meet their obligations. For example, in 2020, they only fulfilled 1 out of the 58 promised in Phase 1. That's basically how they do it. It's around 60 to 70 at most. Does everyone have trump cards, right? Everything here is unexpected, I would say. China's trump cards. Rare earth metals, as you understand, are a real source of leverage. Already used in 2025, a huge domestic market. Apple sells tens of millions of phones there. Tesla sells hundreds of thousands of cars. Even though half of China doesn't have much purchasing power, but half of China, gentlemen, is still half of 1.5 billion people. And that half does have purchasing power. Well, at the level of, so to speak, buying some kind of product, right? Now, China has also done one more very important thing for them. They diversified their trade. We pulled back from trade with them, exports and so on, but they managed to redirect it. And in fact, after losing our 20%, they grew by 21.8%. So they're actually in the black. So psychologically, they're in this position. Well, yes, you reduced our trade on your market, but we went and found somewhere else and so on. And there's one more psychological point. Trump came to Xi, not the other way around. The trump card is in Xi's hands. Technology, superiority in semiconductors. China has no way forward without American or Dutch chip-making machines. Control over the financial system. The dollar, SWIFT. Military dominance in the Pacific Ocean, Iran. The war has created a real oil problem for China. The U.S. can ease or tighten it. Well, here are the terms of a naval blockade. They can intercept anything heading toward China in all the oceans and say, this is all under sanctions, or, well, come up with something else like that, and make holes in the ships. Before we move on to the conclusions, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell. I do these kinds of analyses regularly, and they come out before the major media write about them. For those who support the channel at the $4 per month level, the next material is already available exclusively. The link will be in the description. Here you go. How will all this affect the 3 questions that interest us? The war with Iran. This is the hottest point of negotiations, and the one that's talked about the least in public, and it will continue to be discussed the least in public, because if there are any agreements, they will be secret. The Strait of Hormuz, about half of China's oil imports pass through it. Iran's blockade of the strait and the American counter-blockade of Iranian ports have literally paralyzed part of China's oil routes. China is suffering. So for now, they have reserves, but in about, I can't recall exactly, but I think they can last 3 to 6 months. But this gives Washington leverage. If Beijing even publicly distances itself from Tehran and stops helping them bypass sanctions, it will affect the war economy. And as I already said, the most important thing in war is the economy. Iran without Chinese money and the Chinese oil market will find itself in a much more difficult position. So even sitting in those very catacombs of theirs, they will start to feel it. This is not the end of the war, but it is a shift in the balance. Now, the second thing is the American elections. Trump is flying to Beijing not only as a president, but also as, well, a candidate for his party's success in November 2026, the congressional midterm elections. If he brings home an announcement about major Chinese purchases like wheat or Boeing, then the farmers and vegetable growers of Iowa and the workers of Seattle will feel it. If, at the same time, inflation starts to go down because of tariff relief, Wall Street will be happy too. And Wall Street flew in with Trump personally. Goldman, BlackRock, Citi. This is a direct bet. Diplomacy as an election campaign. And this isn't criticism, it's just political reality. Now Russia and Ukraine. Here, the connection is actually less direct, but it exists. China is Russia's main economic partner under Western sanctions. If Beijing, for the sake of normalizing relations with Washington, starts to build its relationship with Moscow a bit more cautiously, it will weaken the Kremlin's economic support. Not instantly, not publicly, but structurally, as they say. In addition, if the war involving Iran begins to de-escalate thanks to China, thanks to Beijing's mediation, then the U.S. will free up diplomatic and military resources to put more pressure on Moscow regarding the Ukrainian issue. The connections here aren't direct, but they're quite real. Well, now here's what will most likely happen. Here's a realistic forecast. Trump and Xi will announce a package of trade deals, Boeing, soybeans, beef, for some nice round figure. A trade council will be created as a control mechanism. As for chips, there might be a slight cosmetic expansion of the license. On Iran, there will be behind-the-scenes agreements without any public commitments. Nothing significant will change regarding Taiwan, although the wording might be adjusted somehow, yes. There will be nothing like what is called a G2. There will be no secret collusion or special alliance. The superpowers won't unite against the world. There will be an absolutely pragmatic deal between two leaders who understand each other perfectly. They are competitors, but competition with destroyed trade benefits no one. And that's the good news. That's the good news. 50 years ago, Nixon flew to Beijing with the same sense of impossibility. The Cold War, an ideological chasm, nuclear weapons on both sides. And yet, they shook hands, and the world became a little less dangerous. Today, the situation is different. In some ways, it's better. The U.S. and China don't have an ideological confrontation. We're still going our separate ways, but it's not comparable to the Soviet-American confrontation of those times. They have economic rivalry, but also economic interdependence. Elon Musk manufactures in China. Jensen Huang wants to sell in China. Tim Cook has been building factories in China for 20 years. Money, of course, is not a guarantee of peace, but money is a very powerful argument against war. Trump didn't bring an army to Beijing. He brought entrepreneurs. And in this, despite all the risks, despite all the cynicism of big politics, there is something encouraging. The two largest economies in the world sat down at the table. That's already better than if they hadn't sat down. If you found this analysis useful, please like the video. Share it with those who find it important. Subscribe to the channel. Click the bell icon. There's a lot more content coming that you won't find in regular news. And for those who want to get exclusive episodes before anyone else, well, it's $4 a month. The link is in the description. I'll be covering this China meeting every day, and we'll see if my sense of reality matches what unfolds at the summit. Trump himself is an extraordinary leader. He might have some surprises up his sleeve. He just said something, by the way, and then thought about it. So what kind of surprises could Trump actually have up his sleeve? Well, I'll say right away, they could be much bigger than anything I can come up with. But, well, I'll come up with whatever I can. The first thing is not to bring up Iran at all. Just come and not talk about it. In other words, not to talk about what the Chinese are waiting for the most. The position is this. We're doing just fine on our own. And if you're short on oil because of this, then come to us. We can talk about it with you. No, not about our problems, but about your problems. The second thing is not to touch on Taiwan at all. Wait until the Chinese themselves, so to speak, bring it up. Third, suggests not to lend us money, but to invest in America, as the countries of the Persian Gulf have already done, as well as China's neighbors in the region, and also Japan, South Korea, and many others. who want to become part of the American century of stability with a completely revamped economy based on artificial intelligence. In other words, to turn this summit from a supposedly foreign policy event into an entirely economic summit. It could turn from Yalta II, which everyone fears is something that divides the world, into something that unites the world. So, where did you invest your money? You don't fight with those you invest in, even if our ideology and China's are completely opposite. It's not about forgetting grievances or differences and suddenly living in harmony, but it's about us stopping putting obstacles in each other's way. And here I really want all of us to remember the Trump Doctrine, or the Donroe Doctrine as he calls it, for those who don't understand or don't remember. This is a paraphrase of the Monroe Doctrine, the American president who defined the areas of interest of the United States as our immediate surroundings, not Africa, Europe, or distant Asia. This doesn't mean we shouldn't trade. It means that we shouldn't rush off to faraway foreign lands and get involved in pacifying, ending wars, resolving conflicts, and so on. Trump defined his doctrine as a continuation of Monroe when the United States of America takes care of its own backyard, which in my view extends about, 22,500 miles around the borders of the United States of America. He suggests finding strong states in each region that will stop the fights and those who interfere with trade in their own region, in their own backyard. Naturally, all these blocs will trade with each other, will have trade relations with each other. But the functions of protecting property and citizens will not lie with just one side, like it was with the United States of America as the international police for the last 30 years. Instead, they would be distributed among, let's say, one strong country in the region, or maybe an alliance of several countries, who work specifically to prevent wars from breaking out. Killings. Trump might say, let's not solve short-term problems, but problems for the next 100 years. China and America are the most formidable countries in the world, both economically and militarily. No one even comes close to third place. Yes, all other countries, including Russia, Turkey, and India, are far behind, at a distant 174th place. Both you and we need stability. Both you and we need development based on stability. I'm not suggesting we become best friends. I'm just suggesting we become global guarantors of peace on the planet. Global guarantors. Global guarantors, of course. Then everything at the summit is seen from a totally new perspective. Well, once again, Trump is probably the closest thing to a genius among the people we've seen in world politics over the past, half a century. So we'll see, dear friends. And now, America without Sharia. Not very lengthy, not very long, but still an extremely important topic for us. What was actually discussed in Congress on May 13? What triggered the hearing? The reason was the growth of the American Muslim population, about 3.5 million people in 2026. In 20 years, the number has doubled, with the emergence of private Islamic arbitration courts in several states, which handle family disputes according to Sharia law, the adoption in several universities and towns of various definitions of Islamophobia as a punishable administrative offense, and most importantly, foreign funding of American mosques and schools from Qatar, Turkey, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. There are hundreds of millions, actually, yes. Well, maybe billions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars a year. The trigger was not a single incident, but a growing sense that what happened in the United Kingdom could happen here as well if we don't start asking questions in advance. So what exactly do Muslims want? Here we need to be precise. The overwhelming majority of American Muslims want nothing more than what any American Christian or Jew wants: to go to their mosque, celebrate their holidays, raise their children in their tradition, and be full citizens. According to Pew Research, about 80% believe that the main American document is the Constitution, not the Quran. They work, serve in the military, pay taxes, they are part of American life. But there is what is called an active minority, organized and therefore powerful. This is a network of structures ideologically connected to the Muslim Brotherhood, CAIR, ISNA, MS, MSA, and their counterparts, which are funded from Ankara or from Donbass. Their public agenda sounds mild. protection of Muslim civil rights, fight against Islamophobia, right? But their internal agenda, documented in court materials from the Holy Land Foundation case, this is what one of their leaders, Muhammad Akram, called in a 1991 memorandum the strategy of expanding jihad or global jihad. This part, not the American Muslim, the taxi driver in Brooklyn, was the target of their mission. Why are Christians, Jews, and secular conservatives opposed? The objections come down to one point. In America, there is one law for all. The First Amendment to the Constitution is equality before the law, and the 14th is the foundation on which the American Republic has stood for 2.5 centuries. Sharia is not just another religion. Sharia is a parallel legal structure with its own family law. Polygamy, by the way. Custody defaults to the father, divorce is unequal. With its own inheritance law, the son's share is twice as much as the daughter's. With its own criminal law, apostasy, blasphemy, with its own financial law, any such system that operates on the territory of our country either replaces American law or operates beneath it. In both cases, two Americas are created. This is fundamentally important. The objection is not theological, but purely legal. The same Protestant, the same Catholic, the same Orthodox Jew in the United States live according to civil law, and they follow their religious tradition voluntarily and honestly. No one is proposing a galactic court with compulsory powers. No one is proposing canon law in Louisiana. Only one religious tradition in the past 20 years has raised the issue of public recognition of its own law as a parallel system, and that's exactly what the hearing was about, because we have the British example. In the United Kingdom today, according to various estimates, there are between 30 and 85 Sharia councils. They handle family disputes. Formally, they are voluntary, but in reality, they are the only real way for a woman from a conservative Muslim community to get a divorce, because without a religious divorce, she faces social ostracism. A 2018 report by the House of Lords and independent studies have documented systematic inequality. Women lose custody, forfeit their dowries, and remain in abusive marriages. All this happens within a country that guarantees gender equality. The British need to decide. Either they follow Sharia and everyone lives by Sharia, or they live by British law, and then everyone lives by British law. The British lesson is very simple. If you allow a parallel system within a generation, it becomes mandatory, even if it started out as voluntary. For whom? For those who have no choice. The dangers are real, but they should be named honestly without apocalyptic rhetoric. 1. A code of silence about the law. A society where it is forbidden to discuss one religion except with praise is the end of the First Amendment. 2. Parallel jurisdictions as described above. 3. Foreign funding. When a mosque is built by Qatar, the mosque is not a community but an instrument of state policy and influence. 4. Demographic inertia. The third generation, born in America, ends up being raised not by American parents, but by Turkish Qatari curricula. And this is no longer a question of immigration. This is not a melting pot, when we all mix together, so to speak, and it turns into a soup made from all of us. This is their complete separation and isolation from our society. Sobriety also requires the opposite understanding. Most American Muslims are allies, not opponents. It's foolish to lump together a taxi driver from Brooklyn and a care official into the same category. And the hearing on May 12, especially its organizers, will not allow this foolishness. A realistic forecast, the legislation will achieve almost nothing immediately. The hearing is doctrinal in nature. It becomes part of the Congressional record. Principles are being established that courts and states may rely on in the future. Several states, Texas, Florida, Oklahoma, Tennessee, have already passed laws prohibiting the recognition of foreign religious law in civil cases. After this hearing, when all of this is published, there will be more such states, many more. The main result is to bring it out of the shadows into the open. For 10 years, only fringe groups and Fox News have discussed it. Now Congress is discussing it, thank God. And this changes the rules of discourse. What was called Islamophobia yesterday is now called a constitutional issue. And from that moment on, it becomes a legitimate question. Society has a chance to respond to it correctly. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, when something happens in Britain, we should treat it as a good thing that they warned us. But it would be better if they got rid of it.
Чтобы они из этого избавились, но
That's their business. We're not going to solve it like the Chinese by slaughtering all the Muslims and putting them in camps. Yes, although in America they've already done something like that during World War II. They put all the Japanese in camps. They took them out of their homes, so to speak, from their jobs, from the places where they lived, and sent them to camps. But we also learned from that. It means we make mistakes and we learn. And so I really hope that now we're finding a way not to become like China and not to become like Great Britain. Well, honestly, we should probably start removing the word great from that name. That's all. Goodbye, until we meet again.